On certain days, time seems to pause, not for celebration, but for reflection. Today marks the passing of 4 lives that each left a quiet but lasting imprint on culture, character, and memory. They came from different worlds: television, music, sport, and private life beyond the spotlight, yet each carried a story shaped by persistence, sacrifice, and the unseen weight of legacy. Some were known by millions, others by those closest to them, but all shared something rare: a life that meant something to others. This art is not about fame or headlines. It is about remembering the human stories behind the names, the work left behind, and the echoes that remain long after the final curtain falls. The news arrived quietly, just after the holidays, when most of the world was still holding on to the last warmth of the season. On December 25, 2025, it was confirmed that Michaela Mickey Lee had passed away. The announcement spread slowly, carried first by those who knew her, then by those who remembered her face, her voice, and the energy she brought into a room. There was no spectacle, no loud headlines, just a pause, a moment where people stopped and tried to make sense of the loss of someone who always seemed so alive. Michaela Lee was born on March 31, 1990 in Jacksonville, Florida. From an early age, she carried a natural warmth that made people feel welcome. Friends later described her as someone who could walk into a space and change its mood without trying. She listened easily, she laughed often, she had a way of making people feel noticed, even in passing moments. Growing up in Florida, her world was shaped by community, conversation, and the small daily interactions that quietly define a person's character. Her early years were not marked by ambition for fame. Instead, they were shaped by connection. Those who knew her during that time remember someone who thrived on bringing people together. Whether through gatherings, shared work, or simple conversation, she had an instinct for understanding people, for reading the energy in a room, and for knowing how to make others feel at ease. As she grew older, that instinct became a path. After relocating to Atlanta, Georgia, Mickey found her place in the world of event curation. Working with the Mingle Experience, she helped design and organize events that focused on human connection. These were not just social gatherings. They were spaces built around shared experience, networking, and community building. She worked behind the scenes, shaping moments that allowed others to shine. Those close to her often said that this work suited her perfectly. She was not someone who needed the spotlight, but she understood how to create it for others. Her role required patience, creativity, and an emotional awareness that could not be taught. In many ways, this work reflected who she was, someone who believed that moments mattered, and that people deserved to feel seen. Her entry into reality television came later, when she appeared on the 27th season of Big Brother. For many viewers, this was their first introduction to her. The show brought visibility, attention, and a level of exposure that few people are ever truly prepared for. Inside the house, she was watched, discussed, and interpreted through the lens of entertainment. Yet even in that environment, her natural warmth remained visible. She was not defined by drama or confrontation. Instead, she was often remembered for her emotional openness, her humor, and her ability to connect with others under pressure. For some viewers, she represented authenticity in a space that often rewards performance. Her presence felt human, in a setting designed for spectacle. Still, those who knew her best understood that television was only a small chapter in her story. It did not define her purpose or her identity. When the camera stopped rolling, she returned to the life she had been building, one rooted in creativity, connection, and community work. A friend once described her as someone who made every room feel lighter, even on hard days. Another shared online, Mickey had a way of listening that made you feel understood without saying much at all. These were not the words people use for celebrities, they were the words used for someone deeply present in the lives of others. Her passing on December 25, 2025, came as a shock to many. The timing alone, a day associated with celebration of family, made the news feel heavier. Yet the response that followed was quiet, reflective, and deeply human. Tributes did not focus on fame or achievement, they focused on kindness, on energy, on the feeling of being around her. One message shared online read: "She brought light into rooms without asking for anything in return. That's rare." Another simply said, "Thank you for the moments." These words captured something essential about her life. She was not defined by headlines or numbers. She was remembered for how she made people feel. In the days that followed, stories emerged from different chapters of her life, from childhood friends in Florida, from colleagues in Atlanta, from viewers who felt they had seen something real in her during her time on television. Each memory added a layer to the same picture, a person who lived with openness, warmth, and quiet intention. Her story also serves as a reminder of how visibility can be both a gift and a weight. Reality television offered her a platform but it also exposed her to judgment, expectation, and public scrutiny. Through it all, she remained grounded. She returned to her work. She stayed connected to her roots. She continued building spaces for others, even when attention shifted elsewhere. In many ways, that choice defined her more than anything else. She did not chase constant recognition. She chose meaning over noise, connection over visibility, and, in doing so, she left an impression that lasted far beyond screen time. As people reflect on her life, there is a shared sense that her story represents something familiar and deeply human. A reminder that not all impact is loud, that not all legacies are built in front of cameras. Some are built quietly, through consistency, kindness, and presence. Michaela Lee's life was one of moments of laughter, of connection, of shared experience. She moved through the world with an open heart, leaving traces of warmth wherever she went. Though her time was brief, the echoes of her presence remain in the people she touched and the spaces she helped create. In the end, she's remembered not for how widely she was seen, but for how deeply she was felt, and in that memory, her story continues, carried forward in quiet gratitude, in shared recollections, and in the simple truth that some lives leave a light behind long after they are gone. The news came quietly, without fanfare or headlines. For many, it passed almost unnoticed. But for those who understood her place in history, the loss of Dianne Holechek marked the passing of a woman whose life had been lived with steady strength. Far from the spotlight she once stood beside, Dianne Holechek was born on November 27, 1941. In Los Angeles, California. She came of age in a time when the world moved differently, when ambition was carried with patience and family was often placed before personal recognition. Long before fame entered her life, she was simply a young woman with hopes, responsibilities, and a future that would soon intertwine with someone destined for global recognition. She met Chuck Norris while still young, before the world knew his name. Their relationship began in ordinary circumstances, shaped by shared dreams and the uncertainty of early adulthood. At the time, there were no cameras, no red carpets, and no guarantees. There was only effort, belief, and the quiet work of building a life together. When Chuck joined the United States Air Force and later began training in martial arts, Dianne stood beside him through long periods of absence and financial strain. These were not glamorous years. They were years defined by patience, adjustment, and sacrifice. She supported a future that was still unformed, holding the family together while ambition slowly took shape. As his career began to grow, so did the demands on their family life. Dianne became a mother, raising two sons, Mike and Eric. While navigating the pressures that came with a rising public figure, her role was not one that earned headlines, but it was one that required resilience. She managed a household shaped by movement, uncertainty, and the early stages of fame. Those close to her have often said that she carried herself with calm resolve. She was not drawn to attention. She preferred stability, routine, and the simple rhythm of family life. While the world began to associate the Norris name with strength and action, Dianne represented something quieter: emotional grounding, patience, and constancy. As Chuck Norris's career accelerated, the distance between private life and public image grew wider. Film sets, travel, and public appearances became part of daily reality. Through it all, Dianne remained focused on her children, ensuring that their upbringing remained steady despite the changing world around them. Friends from that time later recalled her as deeply devoted and protective. One family acquaintance once shared, she was a center of the home, no matter what was happening outside. She made sure her children felt safe and supported. It was a role she carried without recognition, yet one that shaped the family's foundation. The pressures of fame, however, often come at a cost. Over time, the distance between public life and private life grew harder to manage. In 1989, after years of shared history, Dianne and Chuck Norris divorced. The separation was handled without public conflict or spectacle. It marked the end of one chapter, not the erasure of what came before. Following the divorce, Dianne chose a life away from attention. She did not seek interviews or public sympathy. Instead, she stepped back, focusing on her personal world and maintaining her privacy. It was a choice that reflected her character: quiet, dignified, and grounded. While her former husband's career continued to rise, Dianne remained largely out of view. Yet her influence remained present in the lives she had shaped. Her sons carried forward the values she had instilled: discipline, humility, and respect for others. In that sense, her legacy lived on quietly, woven into the fabric of their lives. Those who knew her later in life described her as gentle and thoughtful. She was someone who listened more than she spoke, someone who valued sincerity over attention. One person who crossed paths with her later recalled she had a calm about her. You could tell she had lived through a lot, but she never carried bitterness. Her life after fame was marked by simplicity. There were no public appearances or attempts to reclaim the spotlight. Instead, she chose peace. She chose privacy, and in doing so, she offered a quiet reminder that not every meaningful life is meant to be lived in front of an audience. Dianne Holechek's story is not one of celebrity, but of endurance. It is a story of a woman who stood beside ambition, helped nurture it, and then stepped away with grace when the time came. Her strength was not loud. It did not demand recognition. It existed in the everyday acts of care that often go unnoticed. In remembering her, it becomes clear that her role was essential. Even if it was never celebrated publicly, she helped shape a family during its most uncertain years. She provided stability when life was unpredictable, and she did so without asking for credit. A family friend once said quietly, she never wanted to be famous. She just wanted her family to be okay. That simple truth captures the heart of who she was. As time moves forward, her name may not appear often in headlines or history books, but her impact remains real. It lives in the lives she touched, the children she raised, and the strength she showed when life demanded it most. Dianne Holechek's legacy is one of quiet resilience, of standing firm when life was uncertain, of choosing grace over attention, and of leaving behind a reminder that some of the most important stories are lived away from the spotlight. In the end, she is remembered not as a figure of fame, but as a woman of steady presence and quiet strength, a life lived with dignity, a legacy shaped by love, patience, and unwavering resolve. And in that quiet legacy, her memory continues to endure. The news was confirmed quietly, without the noise that often surrounds the passing of public figures. On December 20, 2025, Richard Eugene McGeorge passed away, closing the chapter on a life shaped by discipline, endurance, and quiet purpose. There were no dramatic headlines, no sudden rush of attention, just a moment of pause, as those who remembered his name reflected on the kind of career that rarely seeks praise, but earns lasting respect. Richard McGeorge belonged to a different era of football, an era before social media, before constant analysis, before highlight reels defined greatness. He was born into a time when effort mattered more than image, and when the game demanded toughness that rarely showed up in statistics. From an early age, he carried those values with him. He found his path through football at Alon University, where his work ethic quickly stood out. He was not the loudest voice on the field, nor the flashiest player. Instead, he was steady, dependable. Coaches trusted him because he showed up prepared, played through pain, and understood the role he was asked to fill. Teammates respected him because he never asked for more credit than he deserved. In 1970, that steady dedication earned him a place in the first round of the NFL draft. The Green Bay Packers selected him during a period when the team was redefining itself after years of dominance. It was a time of transition, and the league itself was changing. Football in the 1970s was raw, physical, and demanding. Players were expected to endure punishment with little protection and even less recognition. McGeorge entered the league as a tight end, a position that required both strength and selflessness. He blocked more than he caught. He absorbed hits, so others could advance. His role was essential, even if it rarely made headlines. In many ways, his career reflected the heart of football itself, doing the hard work that allows the team to succeed. Those who played alongside him later described him as dependable and focused. One former teammate once said, "You always knew where Rich would be. He did his job, every snap. No excuses." It was a simple statement, but one that carried weight. In a league built on performance, reliability became his signature. Over 9 seasons in the NFL, McGeorge built a career defined not by fame, but by consistency. Week after week, he showed up. He played through injuries that today might have sidelined players for months. He accepted his role without complaint, and in doing so, he earned something more lasting than applause: respect. The game during his era was unforgiving. There were no luxury contracts or long careers guaranteed. Players balanced the physical toll of the sport with the uncertainty of what came next. McGeorge navigated that reality with quiet strength. He understood that football was a chapter, not a destination. Off the field, he carried himself with the same calm discipline that defined his play. He was not one to seek attention. Friends and colleagues described him as grounded, thoughtful, and deeply loyal to those around him. He valued family, routine, and the simple structure of hard work. As his playing days came to an end, McGeorge transitioned away from the spotlight with little ceremony. There were no farewell tours or grand announcements. He stepped back the same way he had played, quietly, with dignity. To him, football had been a responsibility, not a stage. In the years that followed, he remained connected to the values the game had taught him. Discipline, accountability, teamwork. These were not just words to him, they were principles he lived by. Those who knew him later in life often remarked on his humility. Despite his accomplishments, he never spoke as if he had something to prove. When news of his passing emerged in December 2025, the response was reflective rather than loud. Former teammates, fans, and those who remember the era shared simple words of respect. One message read, "He was the kind of player every team needs, even if they don't always notice." Another said, "He played the game the right way." Those sentiments captured the essence of Richard McGeorge. He was not a headline maker. He was a foundation, a player whose impact was felt in the spaces between the plays, in the protection he provided and in the trust he earned. His story also serves as a reminder of how much the game has changed. Today's football often celebrates spectacle, but in McGeorge's time, greatness was measured in endurance and reliability. It was measured in how well a player served the team, not themselves. As the years pass, names like his may fade from public memory, but the values he represented remain deeply rooted in the sport. Every lineman who blocks without recognition, every player who sacrifices for the group, carries forward the same spirit. Richard Eugene McGeorge lived a life shaped by effort rather than applause. He showed that strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply shows up every day and does the work. In remembering him, the focus is not on numbers or trophies, but on character, on the quiet pride of a man who gave everything he had to his team and asked for nothing in return. His legacy lives on in the lessons he embodied: discipline, humility, and unwavering commitment. And as his story comes to a close, it leaves behind a simple truth: greatness does not always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly in the background, holding everything together. That was Richard McGeorge, and in that steady strength his memory endures. The news arrived softly, almost as if it did not want to disturb the silence his music had always respected. On December 22nd, at the age of 74, Chris Rea passed away. There were no sudden headlines, no loud announcements, just a quiet acknowledgement that a familiar voice, one that had traveled with millions for decades, had finally come to rest. Chris Rea was born in Middlesbrough, England, a working-class town shaped by steel, rain, and resilience. His early life reflected that environment. Nothing was handed to him, nothing came easily. Music was not a dream he chased as a child, but something he slowly discovered, almost by accident, as a way to express what words alone could not carry. He did not fit the image of a star. He was reserved, thoughtful, and uncomfortable with attention. Yet there was something in his voice that felt lived in, as if it had already traveled long roads before it ever reached a microphone. When he began writing songs, they were not built for charts, they were built from feeling. His early years in the music industry were difficult. Record labels pushed for polish and commercial appeal, while Rea resisted anything that felt false. He wanted his music to breathe. He wanted it to feel real. That tension defined much of his early career and at times nearly ended it. But Rea held his ground. He chose restraint over spectacle, mood over noise, emotion over trend. Slowly, his sound began to find its audience, people who heard something honest in his voice, something that mirrored their own journeys. Songs like The Road to Hell were not written to impress. They were written to reflect. They spoke of travel, isolation, and the quiet cost of modern life. Listeners did not just hear music, they felt recognized. The road he sang about was not just asphalt and distance, it was life itself, long, uncertain, and full of moments that lingered. Then came Driving Home for Christmas, a song that would take on a life of its own. Simple in structure, gentle in tone, it captured something universal: the exhaustion of travel, the comfort of return, the hope that waits at the end of a long road. Over time, it became more than a song. It became a ritual, played year after year as people made their way back to those they loved. Rea's voice was never smooth in the traditional sense. It was gravel-worn, weathered, and unmistakably human. It carried age even when he was young. That voice, paired with his restrained guitar work, created a sound that felt timeless. He never chased trends. He never needed to. Behind the music was a man deeply private. Fame never sat comfortably with him. He avoided the spotlight when he could, preferring studio work and long stretches away from public life. One close collaborator once said, "Chris never wanted to be a star. He just wanted to make honest music." That honesty became the foundation of his legacy. Health challenges later in life forced him to step away from touring and recording at times. But even then, he continued to create when he could. Music was not a career to him, it was a language, a way of processing the world. And even when his body struggled, that voice remained steady. Fans often spoke of how his songs felt like companionship, not demanding attention, not asking for applause, just present. One listener wrote online, "His music didn't shout at you, it walked beside you." Another shared, "Chris Rea got me through long drives and quiet nights. His voice felt like home." His influence stretched far beyond charts or awards. He shaped a sound that valued patience. He proved that music could be powerful without being loud, that emotion did not need decoration, that sometimes the simplest note carries the deepest meaning. When news of his passing spread, the response was subdued but heartfelt. Tributes poured in from fans across generations. Musicians spoke of his integrity, listeners spoke of memories, long drives, late nights, moments of reflection where his songs had quietly filled the air. There was no sense of finality in the reaction, more a feeling of gratitude, as if people understood that his music had already said everything it needed to say. Chris Ray's life was not about spectacle, it was about staying true to a voice. Even when the world asked for something louder, it was about choosing depth over attention, feeling over fame. In the end, his story closes the way it always lived, gently, no dramatic ending, no sudden silence, just the soft echo of a guitar, a familiar voice, and the sense of a journey completed. His songs remain on the road, traveling with those who need them, in cars, in quiet rooms, in moments of reflection, and in that way, Chris Ray never truly leaves. Because the music does not fade, it simply keeps playing softly in the background of our lives.